Okay, good afternoon, everybody. It's great to see so many of you here today. I'm delighted to welcome you all, those of you who are in the Beverunga room and colleagues who are joining us on Zoom. You're very welcome to today's research seminar. Today's event focuses on a recently published book, and it features three speakers who you can see beside me. Two of the speakers, Dr. Antonio Cascelli and Dr. Denis Condon, are the co-editors of the book Experiencing Music and Visual Cultures, Threshold, Intermediality, Synchresis, which has just been published by Routledge earlier this year. This book is the focus of today's seminar. Our third speaker, the discussant, is Dr. John O'Flynn from DCU. So I'll now briefly introduce our speakers. Antonio Cascelli is Associate Professor in Music and Head of Music at Maynooth University. His main research interests are in arts and music in 16th century and 17th century Italy, Monteverdi, Schenker and Chopin, Goffredo Petrassi, music analysis, and the relationship between music and visual arts. Recent publications include a 2017 book on Schenker's material on Chopin from the Oster collection in the New York Public Library, and an exploration of nature and time in Petrassi's Laudes Creaturarum, which appeared in Kijana, the Journal of Musicological Studies, in 2020. Dr. Cascelli's articles on Monteverdi's Combattimento di Tancredi e Clorinda and l'Orfeo appear in the Cambridge Opera Journal and Filomusica online. Forthcoming publications include Tasso and the Spectatorial Gaze, From Energia to Music, in the edited collection Qual Musico Gentil, New Perspectives on Torquato Tasso and Early Modern Music. A further article includes the Analogy of the Nude in the edited book Museum of Renaissance Music. Currently, he is working on a project about mapping aural and visual imagination in 16th century Italy. Denis Condon lectures on cinema at the Departments of English and Media Studies in Maynooth University. His research focuses on cinema, especially cinema in Irish society in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. Publications in which he has explored this include the book Early Irish Cinema and articles in journals such as Early Popular Visual Culture, Screening the Past, and Field Day Review. Recent publications include Falling Desperately in Love with the Image on Screen, The Flick-to-Flicker Girl, and Cinematic Structures of Fascination in the 2018 edited collection, The Image in Early Cinema. Another article includes The Taste of the Moment Seems All for Pictures, Irish Historical Bodies Before the Early Cinema Screen, which also appears in a 2018 book, Corporeality in Early Cinema, Viscera, Skin and Physical Form. As well as scholarly publications, he disseminates his research to audiences beyond the academy. In the context of Ireland's Decade of Centenaries, he has, since 2013, been chronicling the centenaries of Irish cinema on his blog, earlyirishcinema.com. His interest in the interplay between music and visual culture can be seen in the book under discussion today, but also in the work Players Must Be of a Good Class, Women and Concert Musicians in Irish Picture Houses, and that appears in the 2018 collection Music and Sound in Silent Film, From the Nickelodeon to the Artist, which appeared with Routledge in 2018. Forthcoming work includes the website Irish Cinema Histories, plus the monograph The Explosion of Images, Ireland's First Cinemas. Our final speaker is John O'Flynn, and he is Associate Professor of Music at Dublin City University, and he is the President of the Society for Musicology in Ireland from 2021 to 24. His research interests encompass film music, popular music, music in Ireland, intercultural music practice, music knowledge, and music in higher education. Publications in these areas include numerous journal articles, book chapters, and encyclopedia entries. They further include the monographs Music, the Moving Image and Ireland, 1897 to 2017, which is coming out with Routledge, and The Irishness of Irish Music, which was published by Ashgate in 2009. Further works include the co-edited volumes Music and Identity in Ireland and Beyond, that was co-edited with Mark Fitzgerald and published in 2014. Further books include Ceol Fóric, Music at St Patrick's College, Drumcondra, co-edited with John Buckley, published in 2019, and most recently, Made in Ireland, Studies in Popular Music, which was co-edited with Anya Mangoang and Lunan O'Brien, and published in 2020. And I'm delighted to welcome these three speakers today. Thank you.
Well, I think, although I was introduced last so graciously by Laura, and thank you very much, I think I'm going to start the ball rolling. And first of all, I just want to say what an honour it is to be involved with this publication of this great book. And this is the second live event that I've been at today. Today we had a lunchtime concert with students in DCU, so it's really exciting to be at this seminar celebrating the launch of the book. So first of all, Antonio and Denis, just to say congratulations on such a rich, I don't know if the word is trans, I might take this off as a speaker, if not interdisciplinary collection of essays that suggest multiple connections of ideas, not just for the editors and the authors, but also critically, I think, in keeping with your overall orientation. The connection is there for the perceivers, the experiencers, if you like, of the book, and in this case, the readers. So that's what it doesn't happen too often in edited volumes that you get that synergy between the different ideas and the different sections, and it really comes across as a particular strength of the book, so congratulations on that. So I'll keep going in this vein. It's a beautiful volume in so many ways, for its excellent presentation, editing, and for providing the reader pathways into such a diversity of musical, visual, and audio-visual texts, along with poetry and theatre. I've discovered works and productions I want to know much more about, and I have been diving into particularly some of the visual images, and just to get kind of high resolutions of those, and it's I would recommend that to anyone reading the book, to do that, and also obviously for the audiovisual texts and the musical texts. So I want to know much more about those, but more importantly, I believe, I find as a musicologist, it really offers new vistas and perspectives. And while the theory really engages and provides several threads, what impresses me is how it is the case studies that speak to each other particularly, and it is the most stimulating in the way that the case studies actually augment the theory that underlines it. So I was just going to ask you first, before we get to the book, could you speak a little bit about the conference before the book and the collaboration between both of you as editors?
Yes. I'll start, okay?
You go.
Yeah. John, thank you very much for your introduction, of course. Our collaboration, started 2008, 2009 when I first arrived to Maynooth, but in a very simple but exciting way. I just arrived, and Denis was organizing a production of a silent movie within the movie club here at Maynooth University, and he asked me whether could we arrange someone to play an improvisation during the movie, and that's how we started. At the time, there was a colleague working with students. He's excellent as a jazz pianist, and he was very good at improvisation, and that's how it started. The conversation therefore started at that time, talking about my research, his research, working towards some other form of collaboration for other open days, for other study days, and then at one point we decided, okay, let's organize this conference on music and visual culture. So it was almost a natural progression to how the project emerged.
Yes, the collaboration has been quite a long time gestating. That's led to the book, and 2008 was actually the first year I was teaching in Maynooth, as well as got a contract here in 2008 at the same time. So we were both new and looking for, I suppose, people to collaborate with on research. And my own background has been, as Laura's outlined, in particularly in early cinema and silent cinema, and so being interested in Maynooth Film for All, the film club that operates here, I thought it would be a great opportunity to actually have a silent movie, and the music department seemed the obvious place to come to seek a collaboration on that, and so that was. We also collaborated though, and Antonio will remind me if I have the details right, on the launch here in the Department of Music of the book Music and Visual Cultures, the companion to Music and Visual Cultures from Rutledge, 2014. I think it was 2015 the launch was here.
Yeah, exactly.
That I think you were you were key in organising that event, and I did a short presentation on one of the essays in that. Antonio had contributed to that volume in any case, and I did a contribution at that point. So there have been several collaborations, smaller collaborations over the years, but I suppose it was with the conference that was, and now the book that have been the largest outcomes of that collaboration to date.
Yeah.
I have to say that it's been such a pleasure working with Antonio that I'd be happy to continue our collaborations in some form over the coming years.
And likewise.
Thank you both very much. So, in relation to the book, I want to just move first to the subheadings and the three major themes of the synchronization, synchresis, intermediality, threshold. But before that, I suppose, just to say that you're bypassing other conceptions where people look at different arts together, whether it's Susanna Langer's philosophy about integration of arts, and that's, for some people it's inspiring, for others it's controversial, or even down to more historical approaches. I'm thinking of Barrett Boydell's book on music and painting in the National Gallery, where it's looking more at allegorical relations between painting and music. And then there's those other, I suppose, a popular idea and an actual phenomenon, of course, is that of synesthesia, that very rare kind of sense where some people might experience a correspondence or in their immediate experience of colour and tone and things like that. But your book is about something much broader, and it's focused not only on the artworks or on something technical, but very much on the experience of the perceiver as well. That seems to be a thread that runs right through.
Yeah, that's the main thread, of course. And the whole book, once the conference took place in 2016, therefore we decided, okay, how can we put together a meaningful set of essays? And therefore that's when we started thinking about how we can connect these essays together. The starting point was that, yes, all these trends, these scholarly trends that you mentioned, they're all absolutely valuable. So our point wasn't to disregard this component. But the questions that we both were asking ourselves is, can we theorize somehow the conditions by which we can say that we listen to music and we watch a painting, we watch a movie? How can we theorize the way that seeing and hearing come together? Of course, it's the process of reflection doesn't end with the book, just to be sure about. But that's our main questions, because what we thought in all these absolutely fascinating trends that somehow created the platform, of course, for our questions, was that very often they look at seeing and hearing, the visual context and the oral context, has parallel pathways. space, as if you were able to jump from one to another, but maintaining the boundaries, the borders between these two fields always distinct and separate. So one is the caption to the other, so to speak. But our initial ideas was, we think that there is something more. We can go beyond this idea of these two realms working separately. And can we think of a way to do this? And that's how, therefore, the reflection on this started. And therefore, these three themes developed. And in arriving to these three themes, that's when we, of course, dialogue is an aspect that is a theme that emerges whenever we talk about different areas coming together. So, and the idea of the event is what really caught our attention in this book, Aesthetics After Metaphysics by Miguel de Besteguiu, where he concentrates on the idea of the event, of the work of art, which allows, in his word, I'm paraphrasing, of course, the work of art to neither being fully aligned to the materiality of that work of art, but neither also fully aligned with a transcendent aesthetic idea. So it creates this space where the work of art really walks between the materiality and the possibility of the transcendent idea. And for him, metaphor is something that is very important, because the possibility of seeing an object or a sensory experience to a different object or through a different sensory experience. So basically, the way that now I keep thinking is that allows us to see something through the materiality of one object, through the materiality of something else. So it's not a perfect alignment between the exclusive materiality of that particular object of art. So, but at the same time, so it goes beyond the materiality of the specific object of art, but it doesn't align also with the transcendental idea of what an object of art could be, but allows therefore to go beyond. And that's where all of a sudden we started thinking the three themes are important. So threshold, intermediality, and Synchresis. So the threshold has that liminal state where it is really possible to live in between the different materialities.
Absolutely, and the other concepts being, of course, intermediality, which is also an in-between kind of state, but is that idea of media that exist in media is, of course, a difficult concept, but we were dealing with several media here: painting, music, obviously in various forms, opera, cinema, puppetry, television. Have I left out any? Probably, probably, but we'll get back to them. But we're thinking of that the state of intermediality, where music can seem to be becoming a different type, taking on the characteristics of another medium and almost becoming that medium itself, or similarly any other of the medium. And this arises out of thinking about those media, but of course it exists as a concept within media theory, where we're thinking about maybe the new media of the digital media. What is the digital media? Which it's a kind of a media that does what other media had done before and doesn't really have its identity, or only starts to have an identity, and we've seen that happen within a fairly recent past. So we're thinking of that relationship between different media, and how to conceptualize that, and intermediality. And finally, Synchresis, of course, is a concept that arises out of thinking about synchronization, and that idea that for me, I'm going to use my own example. In silent cinema, for example, or in cinema itself, what we expect from a synchronized image is that when we see something happening, we'll hear the sound, so lip syncing, for example. But Synchresis are those moments that actually make us buy into synchronization. Those. So it could be lip syncing, but the French philosopher and composer Michel Chion talks about the Synchresis is maybe the blow, the sound of a slap, that we hear the clap, and so we buy that's synchronized, whereas other sounds that are around us don't have to be synchronized in order for us to think of. But that moment of Synchresis, that seems to provide a weld between the various media, and it can be used metaphorically as well for other situations, but it provides that weld that makes us believe that everything is synchronized. The media of music and cinema in this case are really working together and are one thing.
Thank you, Roland. Of course, in the Chapter 1, we'll come to the sections in a moment. Alessandra Campana actually says that it's not just the technological trick of synchronization, but that many of the chapters in the book actually look to a synchresis that happens for the subject, whether it's the viewing or the listening or the audio viewer subject, and that it refers to many processes. But I think that from my perspective, one of the most original aspects of this volume is that you're applying this 20th century theory retrospectively to look at works, particularly in the 16th and 17th century. There's a wealth of chapters looking into painting and music, opera, poetry from this period. So I find that really compelling. And if I can just say, one of the things that I found, a connection I found was between, we'll come to, both of your chapters are in the last section, but I want to say this straight away. So in the introduction, I think it might have been your section, Denis, where you mentioned the myth about the train breaking through the imaginary fourth wall of the screen. And then in your chapter, Antonio, you're talking about, the Veronese, Le Nozze di Cana, and the fact that it's theatrical and it's almost like a proscenium, and it's inviting you to go into it. So I just thought there was a lovely kind of dialogue between those two ideas, and that was something very new for me. But could we go to, maybe, I'm just going to check our time here, Laura. We're going to go through the 4 sections of the book, if that's okay. And so part 1, setting the scene. So this contains 2 chapters, as I said, Alessandra Campana's Sync and Scenes of Implication, and this obviously does follow on from your theoretical section, and I found the examples quite compelling here. The quote from Kevin Donnelly that is looking at sound image synchronization, particularly when we have these more modern self-conscious versions, as being a kind of a cult. It is something occult. It's something that is trying to, I suppose, transcend, and it is moving over a threshold, and particularly that exposure of the opening sequence to Orson Welles' Touch of Evil, and the difference in the edited version, which is washed with the Henry Mancini score, and then the original sound version, which had much more a mess and a contestation, so it was very interesting. And then Giovanni Carreri's Armida in between, so Michael is here, Michael Lee, who also focuses on this one of two chapters which refers to painters and musicians, and others responds to Tasso's epic poem Jerusalem Delivered, and especially in this chapter by Carreri, the Rinaldo and Armida by Nicolas Poussin. So he really looks at he just guides the reader through the text in the original poetry and the translation in relation to the visual, and then this metaphor of mirroring comes in, and of the, I don't know if the term self and other come in, but both of these examples, one focusing more on the modern audiovisual, the other looking back to a much earlier sensibility and the way people might have. So would you just sort of maybe discuss a little bit about how these chapters set the scene as you coin it?
Yes. Well, to start with, both Alessandro Campana and Giovanni Carreri were the keynote speakers actually at the conference here in 2016. And of course, it was done on purpose that if it is a conference on music and visual culture, we wanted to hear speakers from these two fields. In what way they set the scenes? I think, for me at least, they set the scenes in this way because in the way that they engage somehow with the idea of metaphor, or seeing something in terms of something else, seeing the materiality of one object with the materiality of another object. And I use the word object here in a very broad sense. On the process, I think, of how we move from one object to the other and backward. And I think that's I think is, for me at least, is central to both chapters, because in Alessandra Campana's in her chapters, she uses aspects of visual elements, but for the oral element and other way around. For Giovanni Carreri, at the center, what I think is fascinating in Giovanni Carreri is that what allows this process of transmigration of movement from one object to the other is the affective force that is at the basis of the text in question. But for both, again, the element that I think is very important is the presence of, using Michel Chon definition, is the idea of an audio spectator, and therefore going back to what we said in the introduction when we were talking about what could bring together, of course, these different sensory, and is the presence of a body. So there is an embodiment that is at the core of these. And I think that in both chapters, they really set the scene because in completely different ways, of course, but really bringing to the fore how this process of transmigration, of recognition of something else into something else is happening through the body. The body, of course, of the audience, the body of the listener, the body of the viewers, which really becomes central to this process. I don't know if you want to.
Yes, absolutely. And you made me think of as well that the two essays embody different types of methodologies, as well as folky, different folky, of course. One much more embedded in a film studies methodology, and the other in what I would think of iconography, but this new type, I think, of trying to combine music and visual culture, and to try and think beyond traditional forms of iconography. so that Giovanni Carreri's article is very much concerned with a kind of very careful textual analysis of different texts, while keeping in mind the something that is transferred between those texts. What is it that's transferred between those texts? Whereas Alessandra Campana's essay very much is that body, and I think of course we talked a little bit about the syncretic moment, but for me she had me with her opening, what she calls a provocation, thinking about how musicology and visual studies might talk to each other more productively, perhaps, in a theoretical way. And she does that in the moment where she talks about Althusser's discussion of the subject, the process of becoming a subject and subjectivity, when a person in the street is hailed by a policeman who says, "Hey you," and the person turns around, "Who, me?" And by that act, a gesture, a turning, but also a dramaturgy that's visual and auditory, you become a subject. You become emplaced. You become that body that's located. And I found that a very compelling moment in the essay, that then goes on to talk about that syncretic moment where we have that moment of syncresis, that moment of recognition or subjectivity and of embodiment, of emplacing, that comes when she does talk about the use of the examples that you've already given. Yeah, sorry, I'm beginning to babble now.
And I know that, no, thank you very much. And I know that, Antonio, you fantastically used the Althusser's "Hey you" idea in the looking at the, or have I mixed that up with another chapter, in looking into the monks when they're looking at the painting. We'll come to your chapter anyway.
Yes, no, but that's the one. Yes.
But you do make a lovely link there. I think, again, looking back, using this theory, but thinking retrospectively. So I was really excited by that. So moving on to the second part, voice as present and absence. I think that includes 4 chapters. So Francesca Placanica's first is La Voix Humaine and the Epiphany of the Performer's Identity, based on Francis Poulenc's one-woman opera from 1958, based on another text, Jean Cocteau's monodrama from 1928, and then the many stagings up to 2016. And it's really a fascinating chapter in which I think there's a very strong performer perspective in this, and a very strong theoretical one also. Monodrama presents all the challenges of staging the dialectic between presence and absence, and particularly, of course, in this particular opera, which is based on a telephone call that somebody receives, and it's a personal sort of drama, but there are so many parts to it. Hayley Fenn's chapter, Puppets That Sing or Scenery That Breathes, Phelan MacDonald's Satyagraha, which is the Philip Glass opera, and it's a production referring particularly to McDermott's production, first at the ENO and then the Met in New York. And among many concepts in this chapter, suggested to me was the intermediality of the puppets, as a kind of a voice that is present but also absent, and also between sound and visual and aspects is one thing that Fenn kind of brings out here. And then I think also because the puppets are actually giant-sized, It is actually flipping our perspective of whether we are looking at something small or something much bigger is looking at us, and sounding and listening to us. So that adds another dimension. Moving on to chapter 5, Jennifer O'Mara's chapter, which I think introduces a new theme and a really important one, which is an ethical one, manipulating public images in the contemporary music documentary, focusing on Amy 2015 and Montage of Heck about Kurt Cobain, also 2015. It gives an analysis of many perspectives, and I think it actually raises the dark side of mixing, and whether it's synchronizing audio and vision together, but it explores some of the ethical implications of that as well. So again, it's the absent voices, particularly of the artists who are deceased, and the ethical implications of using footage that was private to them, particularly. But it also more generally reminds us of the spectral presence, to adopt again Kevin Donnelly's term, that all film, once you film a subject, a person, or paint, that it has a ghostly presence, and that comes through. And then finally, Laura Miranda's A New Carmen for a New Spain, Nationalism and Cinema During the Spanish Civil War. And this is another example of, or exploration of, appropriation and manipulation through intermedial means, which in some way parallels the original opera in terms of the treatment of the voice of the female other, and of course of fascist Spain's others, which is sort of transferred or augmented in this ideological production. So it's quite a mixed section.
Yes, it is a mixed section, but like the whole book, it is mixed.
Yes.
And as you said at the beginning, of course, that's the purpose of this book. And what I would like to say is that yes, we have this. Once we have setting the scene, then we have this three further section that we had a discussion at one point, and we thought, do we want to simply give one of the theme to each one of these section, which would have been quite an obvious way to do so. But we decided, okay, we decided to look for what are the aspects that we think these chapters grouped in this different way can bring to the fore. And even though we could say that probably the first section is focused mostly on threshold, but within threshold what we were interested in is exactly was the voice that could conjure up at the same time a presence and an absence in so many ways. So the voice becomes the embodiment of different subjectivities that can be present and therefore can be seen, or may not be present, but they can probably still be seen whilst not being present. So that's the aspect that we decide to let emerge, at least in this section.
It's that process of, we had, I mean, as you're rightly pointing out, this is a collaboration between us as editors, but I mean there's also 13 other contributors to this book, and they have produced they've all produced fantastic work that is multifaceted. And although we were attempting to provide a kind of a coherent narrative that we think we have done, but the essays themselves do speak to various concepts, obviously. We went through a process, and I don't know if Michael wants to talk about this, but we went through a process of, we obviously had the conference, and then we had the idea that we'd have the book, but also we wanted to do justice to the essays. The essays speak to many different themes, and not just if we're saying, and we are saying that there is an element in which these essays talk to each other in terms of a concept such as the threshold, because they speak about performance in a very interesting way, I think that doesn't. That's not the limit of what these essays are saying, you know. So the process of editing the book then was to say that, look, we think this essay speaks to this concept, but it's not the only concept that this speaks to, obviously, and none of them only speak to one concept. I think maybe.
Well, I think that I think it's very refreshing that although you set up these three subheadings and you have those three to the fore in the introduction, you don't use them for the sections, which I like actually. So you have the sections, and it's how the essays relate to each other, but the three concepts can be applied to all of them. Mm-hmm. So I think that works really well structurally. I know you wanted to ask Michael a question, but we might wait until we come to the actual section, if that's okay. And so it's beyond borders. And so I'll just go through this for people that may not have had the opportunity to look at all of these. So I think it's Monica Chiaffo's Uber Opera, The Politics of Site-Specific Mobility Opera in Los Angeles. A compelling critique of a self-conscious deconstruction of audiovisual hierarchies through moving the spaces and places of opera production. And I think then an opera production called Hopscotch. And then Chiaffo discusses the irony of its Hopscotch's critical success, and yet it had a political backlash. And again, there's an ethical implication there of this kind of top-down of bringing opera to communities, and then the commercial imperative behind a lot of it still. So she comments towards the end that it portrays as much about opera's uneasy relationship to privatization, mobility and urbanity as they do about opera's triumphs at the thresholds of genre, form and spectatorship. So I thought it was very interesting that it was looking at it from the point of view of the surfaces and the interactions and the materiality, but also more broadly critically in its sociological context. So Michael Lee, Quel trouble me ceci, The Arrested Gaze of Armide in Poussin, Quino and Lully. So as before, the focus is on this incredible exchange between Rinaldo and Armida, and it's very lively opening, talking about the musicological, what effectively is a musicological debate over French and Italian music, particularly in relation to Lully, and I thought it was really fascinating exploration of the idea of spectacle from a 17th century perspective. If I have my centuries right, I always get mixed up. But I found that really, really interesting that it built up so well the case for thinking that our way of seeing everything synchronized in a very mechanical way, it certainly would have been a very different way. And I think that because presentations and performances had so many different kind of media in the cultural sense, that it really shows that as Michael says on page 128, that it was these are inherently intermedial, whether experienced through rhetorical effect, painterly expression, or physical or musical gesture. And then moving on to, this is a long section, I think it goes to, but I'll go quickly, Pascal Vandelanotte, is that the right pronunciation?
Vandelanotte.
Oh, Nietzsche. Okay, and Ken Russell's Mahler, a musical phantasmorgia. So it's an excellent analysis again, and in this chapter, the editing, the music editing it's not trying to have a fidelity in terms of film adaptation or biography adaptation, but it's something new, it's intermedial, and the music is not only there as an inspiration, but also as a central topic, as he puts. And I thought that this echoes Julie Brown's treatment of Ravel and this idea of composer biography and an authorial presence of another absent voice in the actual narrative of that. That's in the French film Encore en hiver. And I think also it also brings to mind the presence of Janacek in The Unbearable Lightness of Being. Again, it's not about Janacek, but the music just has this this other presence. Jessica Shine's chapter is There's Meth in the Madness, Music and Incongruence in AMC's Breaking Bad. Brilliant discussion here on incongruence, referring to obviously Dave Ireland's work on this, but also looking at incongruence in a more psychological way also, and then has this really, really detailed analysis and I think convinces us of the use of incongruence. But I also found it, more broadly, the chapter was very good in stimulating idea about the fashion for incongruence, for I suppose, putting it very simply, deliberately non-matching music and in film and TV series. And I also thought about where this might lie in relation to Eisenstein's idea of counterpoint in early 20th century film, and how that relates to this idea of incongruence, which seems to be more current, let's say. So they were just sort of some of my summary thoughts on that. A very, very lively section.
One other chapter, I think you might
Oh, sorry, beg your pardon.
Marisol Quevedo.
I'm so sorry.
Or am I wrong?
You know,
I think I finished.
That's the music in Cuban Revolution.
Oh, you're right. Sorry, yeah, I have it here. Sorry, pardon me. Yes, so Marisol Quevedo, Music in Cuban Revolutionary Cinema, Musical Experimentation in the Service of Revolutionary Ideology. Apologies for that. So yeah, really interesting in how cinema became central to post-revolutionary policy in Cuba, and especially the composer Brewer and others' employment of avant-garde alongside established conventions of film scoring. I was quite surprised with that, that there wouldn't be an ideological objection to sort of using Hollywood-esque. This was another type of ideological appropriation and development of audiovisual media, but I think as Quevedo points out, this benefited many composers and other musicians. It provided employment in post-colonial Cuba. So yeah, sorry, apologies for missing that one also.
Yeah, and also I think, sorry, just in this one, that it was a way of having that music in the public domain.
Yeah.
Ideologically suspect rock and roll or bossa nova or jazz, could be heard and actually screened in film if it appeared in a context in which it was seen to be presented with the teenagers who were outside the mainstream, and so they were the bad teenagers basically, you could show that and it would be closed down perhaps, but you'd still get that representation and it could still be shown.
yeah, but very briefly to add about this section, which is titled Beyond Borders. So here the driving thought was to really to put together chapters that explored how one domain really goes across its own borders to the other side, or we could say. But in going to the other side, then almost the identity of the I don't want to say of the original side, because it's really difficult to say there is an original side, but let's say of the starting side, the identity of that starting side then is put almost in questions, because the moment it is able to cross, so the question is, okay, so where does the identity of this form then rely? So that is put in question by this possibility of moving, which is, of course, in its own way, is a form of threshold, it's a liminal process. But in this particular chapter, the idea of really going towards a different side, I think, was really there at the forefront, and that's why we decided to put this article together, and with this title, Beyond Borders.
Yeah.
Does Michael want to?
Well, I don't really add to that.
It's a fantastic chapter, Michael. I don't. Do you want to talk about the process of the book or any of that?
Well, I can really only speak to my own chapter, to be honest. I mean, it's reflected the work that I've been doing, which has been looking at early opera as a locus of both adaptation and reception. And the fascinating situation that you have in Le Dix Armides, which is this quite exceptional study, really, of a moment of a character in a moment of crisis, sort of stretched out through a 5-act structure, and how that comes out of Kino's reading Kino Andali's reading of both the Tasso original, but also Tasso as mediated through the art of Poussin as well. So there's a sort of a complex interchange, really a network of adaptation that this is coming out of. So there's an opportunity to really to just reflect on that process, and to sort of see that as a way of investigating, if you like, the operatic imagination, and looking at how people would have perhaps visualized the affective content of the work. So trying to understand the 17th century perspective, I suppose.
Thank you. Sorry, I apologize for not mentioning the overarching title for Part 3, Beyond Borders. So where am I with notes? Part 4, from silence to sound and back. So this includes both of your chapters. First we have chapter 12, Ian Sapir, music, painting, cosmos, chaos, flaying and playing in Taishan's Marseilles. This is the most Gothic, I think, of all the chapters, I have to say, but that's probably a lot to do with the painting. And the painting itself, which is about the flaying of a satyr, and it's related to the playing of the pipe, so it goes back to this sort of distinction in music theory and going back to ancient times of the Apollonian and the Dionysian. And that made me sort of think about your perspective on the experience of art or intermedial arts, that you wanted to get beyond the metaphysical, get beyond the sort of that theoretical, rather than think of the properties and proportions. And so I don't know why that just brought that to mind, but I'll come to, so I mean, in what he says in conclusion is that he speaks of a kind of these different ideas of truth that come across different arts, but that Taishan's truth passes through a visual comment on another art whose metaphysical prestige, that's music, has been more ancient and thus more stable than painting. It is truth in music, in silenced sound, that Taishan proposes to his spectators. So again, it's this voice that's unheard, the absent voice, but still that kind of links in then, I think, to your chapter, Antonio, Armonia, seeing and hearing in Paolo Veronese's Le Nozze di Cana. And I think there are many frames and thresholds here, and obviously it's a really strong theoretical chapter, but I love the way that you brought us back into the perspective of the monks who would have seen this in the original refectory. And yeah, as I said there earlier, it gives this impression of the viewer's impression. I think it's from Debussy's theory, the viewer's impression of walking through a painting, and it's just that that the monks, when they look at, I mean, there are so many things in the chapter, but when they look at this painting that was this massive painting in the refectory, that they can perhaps engage with the foregrounding of the musicians in the painting, just in front of Christ, who's the only one that's kind of looking directly out, and that somehow there's a materiality that they can create in their memory of music, and you're, you know, even in the position of the violas that are there, that we can see that possibly a kind of an imitative structure there. So moving on then, to Susanna Pasticci's Listening to Space and Time, Music in Terms of Visual Perception and Vice Versa, and the very, very helpful introduction on the discourses that cross the domains of visual art and music here, in terms of things like rhythm and colour and tone and all of that. And then moves in to look at a particular, not an area of maybe many of us would be familiar with Respighi, but looking at a broader cohort of composers, Malipiero, Casella, and very much a group of composers who are looking at visual art towards providing some inspiration, but also visual arts leaving a tangible mark of their presence through this idea of creating space and time in a different way. So I have to tell everybody that I'm a great fan of Denis's work, because for my own research recently, I've just found his sources to be invaluable in terms of understanding about film and music, particularly in this country in the early decades. So, and in the earlier reference that Laura mentioned there, the book chapter in the book edited by Simon Trezise and Ruth Barton, you know, your previous research highlighted the considerable activity of small to medium string orchestras in Dublin cinemas, the featuring of virtuosos, and female orchestras as mentioned. But so there's this kind of sense that rather than it being a very basic and antiquated scene, if you like, it's really at the threshold of modernity, and the picture houses are not just city centre but suburban. One close to where I live in Phibsborough, you mentioned there, and then there's a sense that it's more accompaniment. Music is more an accompaniment than synchronization in many respects to what's appearing on screen. You refer to Sion's allowable voices in the chapter title, and I was just wondering then to what extent did so these are these operas, these very well developed silent opera films that would have had Geraldine Farrar and Enrico Caruso, but in the Dublin versions they might have had something. It wasn't synchronous. They might have had some celebrity, local celebrity singers, but not. They didn't attempt to kind of replicate her Carmen, for example. So so a really, really interesting array of essays, gentlemen. So I suppose maybe some discussion about how those spoke to each other, perhaps.
Yeah.
Say something, Chris?
Yes. Well, Synchresis is the theme of this section, and I'm quite familiar with the concept from film studies, but I was very inspired by its application in Antonio's essay, and also its application to Ite's essay in contexts that are obviously pre-cinematic, and that seems to really work. to think about that kind of moment of, and it's a moment of presence of the monks in your case, of the observer of the painting of the flame of Marseilles in Ite's case. You know that there's actually the physical spectator. I was going to say the imagined spectator. I think it might be more imagined in Ite's case, where that he has the observers seeing and hearing music, although there's no music playing. In your case, I think it is the actual the monks who are the physical presence that you're recreating. Those moments of in which they can hear, and you make us hear them hearing the music that isn't present in that moment. I have to say, my own essay, which started out being about synchronization because I thought that's what it was about, becomes an essay about intermediality, because synchronization, which I thought existed to a much greater extent, but through the research found no, that's not the case. That synchronization is not even what the musicians and the musical directors are attempting, at least in the 1910s, until we get into the 20s and we get the orchestras and a proper score. Scores do exist, but it's really later that they become something that happens on a regular basis.
Yeah, very briefly I could say a few words about my chapter. The idea there was how can a paintings which reproduce an ensemble of musicians playing, and where there is no music physically present there, can conjure up some musical imagination, oral imagination in the audience. Let's call audience, but there weren't an audience in a modern sense, of course. So, so the idea of syncresis there came out. So if I see music represented silently, what does that to me as a viewer? A viewer with my own musical world in my own imagination. So what would that do, of course, to the monks, who were the first viewers and the main viewers of the time? Although that painting, Le Nozze di Cana, was very famous across Europe, and lots of tourists would go to Venice to see it, and the monks, they had at one point to say, no, stop, we can't have you here to see this and disrupt our lives. So the idea of how can we recreate a sense of ritual, of a rite around this painting, which involves music. So that's how I try to reconstruct. So using a contemporary, our contemporary to us terms, but at the same time trying to be true as much as possible to what were the historical conditions. And this, I have to say, is true of all the chapters, because yes, we are using these very broad 21st century lenses to understand these different experiences, but each chapter then is true to the historical context and conditions which surround any of the repertoire objects that are discussed in each chapter, whether we are talking 16th century Italian paintings, or whether we are talking Breaking Bad, or the rockumentary, or La Voix Humaine, and so on. So.
Thank you. So I think, is there anything else you wanted to?
No, I think these guys have been very patient with all my questions, but maybe, I don't know if there's time for them.
Yeah, so I think I know we're running a few minutes over time, but if anybody has any questions, I think maybe Antonio, we might have a few minutes if that's possible.
I'm happy. We are happy. So
Yeah.
see someone already
Here's-
getting ready.
First of all, just to congratulate the editors on this terrific volume and also the contributors.
Absolutely.
And to thank John as well for his really thoughtful response to the volume, which touched on some of the things I had thought of, but also pushed into some questions I hadn't been asking about it. So thank you for that. This is a very short question. I hope you understand where I'm going with it. I don't think it's quite a provocation in the manner of Alessandra Campana's opening gambit in her essay, but the question, it has to do with music as a time-based medium. How important is it that images do or do not move?
Wow. I think that speaks to both of our.
I think it's coming out of the Synchresis section most,
Yeah.
but I think it's running through the whole volume.
It's to try something first, or
If you have something.
this is just out the top of my head, so it requires further and much deeper thinking. If I look at least in relation to my article, at least I can speak to that. I would ask this question, and I would ask this question in a very provocative way. I'm consciously provocative here. Are we sure the image does not move? And particularly because it is in that particular context. I mean, in my article, I refer to what Giuliana Bruno writes about certain modern installation, and I found her description of one particular installation that seems very appropriate, and I adapted to this particular painting, because she says, the audience go inside, and depending on the time of the day they go, and the installation changes. So the monks, yes, physically are the monks the people who move. They move around around the painting. But if they go there at early in the morning, if they go there at lunchtime, in monks' time, lunchtime is around, let's say, 12:30. So then if they go there at dinner time, probably between 5 and 6 o'clock. At the time, of course, when 16th century, I'm stating the obvious here, of course, there was no electricity, so the painting really relies on the natural light. So could we say that with the change of light, the painting therefore somehow moves and creates a sense of temporality? So a temporality that is, and here I'm really going wild, I'm fully aware of that, and a temporality that is also created by, and I go back to the point that you were highlighting earlier on, by the interpellation that the figure of Christ in that particular, which is the only figure in the painting that really looks straight to the face of the monks entering the room, because when they enter the refectory, the painting is in front of them. They walk around probably towards that, and then they have to move to the tables that are put on the side. And we have a drawing that tells us how the tables were put. So I know I'm answering in a wild, provocative way. It requires further question, but so maybe the fact that the images do not physically move is not really the point, but there is a temporality that is inherent to the temporality of the viewer. Probably I'm going in circle, I know, but I need to think about it. But
Which has to do with the play of light, which has to do with surface, to get back to Giuliano Bruno,
yeah,
which matters.
yeah, exactly.
Surface is deep.
Yeah,
Yeah, which makes me think of the Cave of Forgotten Dreams, which has nothing to do with music as far as I know. Cave of Forgotten Dreams is a documentary by Werner Herzog in which he goes to Chauvet Cave,
yeah.
in which there are newly discovered cave paintings of animals on the wall. And he brings a 3D camera down into the caves, and he's the only person allowed in and to film these, because other, like Altamira and others, had been destroyed by too many people going down. Anyway, he goes in and he films these cave paintings, which we think of, I suppose, as, you know, do cave paintings move? Hardly. They're in stone, except that, you know, light. If you bring light down, and you have a torch, as we suspect cave painters did, they brought down in order to be able to see. But the paintings are painted onto uneven surfaces. So these are surfaces, deep surfaces maybe, that have protrusions and so on. And when you move around these images, and with the uneven surface, they are actually animated, and they move. And so you have animals, you have hunting scenes and so on that seem to move. Whether there's any music involved in kind of a ritual, I mean, this is speculation, of course. You know, they just, you know, that you know. So, could there be music that provides or sound of some kind that provides some other kind of context to a hunting? Is tableau the right word in this case? Probably not. But a scene maybe. But does Synchresis, so that moment of that wells the sound to the image, does that rely on a time-based? Well, you say no. I believe you.
Not sure. Probably. I know we could go on for quite a long time here, and I don't want to. What if Synchresis then is caused exactly by the emergence of a form of temporality?
Mm-hmm.
Whether there is sound, physical sound, or not,
Mm-hmm.
that I don't want to say it doesn't matter, but it is connected somehow. But the moment that there is an emergent temporality, then we can probably have music, or not have music, or have some oral imagination. I don't know. It's very. I can say it's very vague, but it's.
It's the answer my question deserves. But it's as if, I mean, a part of what you suggest, that all tableaux are vivant.
Yeah, exactly.
Thank you.
No, thank you for your question.
I just note we have a comment here from somebody who's joined us from Zoom, and this is Melissa Gerber, who I believe may be a contributor, or no?
No.
Oh, okay, sorry, I might have got that wrong. But she says, such a compelling engagement with the topic. Thank you, and huge congratulations to the editors and authors involved in the project. It's lovely to join this launch all the way from South Africa. So I think it's very nice we have people joining the launch from afar. Are there any further questions? Yeah.
I'll keep my question brief. Congratulations on the book, and this is a great discussion as well. In terms of, we talk about the intersection between visual and audio media, I'm thinking when there's a concert in the National Concert Hall of some challenging or avant-garde works by the likes of Ligeti, it's not particularly easy to sell out those concerts, but when there's a special showing of 2001: Space Odyssey in the Lighthouse, which features music from Ligeti, that would sell out in a heartbeat. So I'm wondering if there's then we talk a lot about, you know, there's a lot of research on the impact of the oral media on the visual media, but is there something we can learn from the impact of the visual media on the oral media that can perhaps inform practice and performance? It's, you know, and should we perhaps be integrating visual media more into musical performance, particularly of maybe contemporary music, which draws less audiences than the well-known canonical performances?
Good question for arts administrators and concept managers.
I guess, just sorry to clarify my question, is you know, do we know enough about, you know, the impact of the visual media on our understanding of the oral media?
Could I just jump
Absolutely,
in there?
yeah.
It's more thinking of higher education and education generally. I mean, in terms of how people study music, and particularly orchestral and symphonic music, the audio technology preceded the audiovisual. So it seems somehow there's an ideology that somehow it's better if we're engaging with a music text. First, the primacy, it has been historically the written score. And if not the written score, then it's the audio text. And I mean, an obvious question for me is, and it goes back to this sort of idea of trying to educate the public, Macpherson, music appreciation and so on in the early 20th century, why do we still adhere to thinking that if we're listening to a recording of music, or we're engaging with the recording, why is it only audio? Why not audio-visual? Why is that not the primary? I mean, there are some arguments against it, particularly the intervention of the editor in an audiovisual, which actually sometimes frames the way that it directs the way that you're listening and engaging, so it doesn't give you the freedom. But that's a really interesting question. So I think but in terms of I suppose your question on the Ligeti particularly, and I love the Stargate sequence, but then there is obviously the whole idea of the intention of the creator of the medium. That's just my thought to that.
No, I agree, and I like your question. So why not involve one? Personally, I mean, I would say yes. And if there is a curatorial aspect involved, I would say very bluntly, I would say, so be it. And let's engage with that aspect. Not everybody might be happy with that. I appreciate that and understand, but it's a very controversial aspect. I mean, I'm not saying that the solution is that simple. Anyway, it goes back to the idea of this, the idea of absolute music that probably is not that absolute at all as we would like to think in many times, even when apparently there is no connection with images, but probably there are more connections than we would like to admit. But again, I'm opening a big door here.
Great question, though.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you.
And it obviously exists in popular music. You know that the visual album is a feature of popular music that has been around for a long time. But the purity of music, maybe, and maybe not in the people here who think of it in terms of the audiovisual, but that there still is a resistance to the visual and to something that might overwhelm or stop, not help the listening, but to hinder it and to push it in a different direction, or to make music the handmaiden of visual.
Thank you.
Are there any final questions for our panel? And we're here. Okay, well, I just want to say thank you again so much. It's been an absolutely fascinating discussion, and yeah, I think as the questions that have gone on afterwards have shown, it seems like the book has opened so many new vistas on research, and I think it's really reminded me about how important it is to collaborate, with colleagues across different disciplinary perspectives. So I want to thank all of our three speakers again, Denis, Antonio and John, and thank you so much as well for sharing in this really wonderful event, I think, to celebrate the book, and congratulations again on the book.
Thank you very much.